1 in 2 of us will be diagnosed with
Cancer.
cancer.
It doesn't get much worse than being told you have stage 4 cancer.
Since I learnt that I had a brain tumour.
As soon as somebody says you're stage 4 and there's no stage 5, then it's a death sentence, isn't it?
So stage 4 cancer means it's spread from the organ of origin to another part of the body. So usually I'm afraid that's incurable.
We all want to find that cure for cancer, but what if we were missing something?
I think we've got everything that we already need to cure cancer. It's just we need to be much more aware of the tools that we already have.
What if we could use a combination of simple existing treatments to starve a cancer cell to death without starving the patient?
We want to cut off the fuel supply to the cancer cells and starve them to death.
Can we eat to starve cancer? Well, the answer is yes, and I'm going to show you how.
I came across the idea of starving cancer when my mum, Yvonne, faced a stage 4 diagnosis. Using a combination of cheap, existing drugs, supplements and diet alongside NHS care, she's living well despite her terminal cancer.
People just look at me and think I'm cured, which is wonderful.
These drugs really are a piece of the puzzle, so they fit in together with other treatments that are ongoing.
We'll follow Yvonne as she joins the growing movement of researchers and patients alike who see terminal cancer as something that can be starved.
More people each year die of cancer in the United States than all the Americans who lost their lives in World War II.
The war on cancer has been ongoing for decades, yet it causes over a quarter of deaths in the UK alone. And with half of patients being diagnosed once the cancer has spread, it can feel like we're fighting a losing battle.
It isn't a lost cause, which is what their oncologists very often tell them it is, and that you can overcome stage 4. It isn't necessarily a death sentence.
So the question is, should we starve terminal cancer?
I'm Georgia Stewardson, and I'm not a scientist or from any medical background, but after seeing a massive change in my mum from a passive patient to someone with hope, I want to find out more about this idea of starving cancer and see if it could make cancer something that we could live with.
Hey!
Mum and I have always been close. She's the type of person to get the giggles at her own wedding and always puts others before herself. But just over a year ago, we found out she had metastatic breast cancer, spread to the liver and spine. It was treatable, but not curable. An intense course of chemotherapy knocked back the tumours, but her health deteriorated.
It was a long, hot summer. My friends came to see me, everybody came daily and they all sat with me for hours. And my grandchildren came and I couldn't even pick them up. And I didn't even have the energy to just play with them or speak to them or read to them. And it was just heartbreaking, really.
With chemotherapy too much, her NHS treatment was changed to a targeted drug and she stabilised. Making it to my graduation was a huge achievement. But we all knew that this targeted drug might only work for 2 years, as the cancer mutates and becomes resistant. So Mum started to look for anything that might extend her life.
We got your iPad and got you working on that and looking at things yourself, because we wanted you to take as much control as you could, which you did, and that led to you finding Jane's book.
Jane McClellan was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer in 1999, but refusing to accept her terminal diagnosis, she used her scientific background to trawl research papers for anything that might offer hope. That's when she discovered the idea of starving cancer.
Treating it a bit like a parasite, and that the cancer is actually feeding off you, and it takes all the nutrients away from you and feeds itself first.
But this idea of starving a cancer cell is not entirely new. In 1924, Nobel laureate Otto Warburg discovered that cancer cells use energy differently and proposed that they could be treated by blocking their energy source. But the idea was overshadowed by a focus on cancer as a genetic disease. Jane saw Warburg's work as a potential lifeline.
It's a complex picture, but it all eventually boils down to how it feeds itself. And if you can stop it feeding, then you can actually stop it from growing.
The idea of starving a cancer cell of its nutrients seems quite simple, but it turns out that cancer cells are smart and highly resourceful at finding food. If you think about all of the roads coming into Piccadilly Circus as the fuel lines that a cancer cell uses to get its nutrients, if you manage to block one route, the cancer cell will simply reroute and find another way to get its food. So how do we block all of the routes effectively?
Surely we would need to develop new, expensive drugs to block all of the routes. Maybe not. Jane used a combination of existing drugs, natural supplements and diet to starve her cancer by every route. And she's been cancer-free since 2004. With a book and growing recognition via her 10,000-strong Facebook group, her map to starving cancer is inspiring people like Mum to do the same.
I was desperate at this point and wanted alternative therapies and to look at other protocols.
It then just clicked for me. There's more out there, and I went crazy in my research, and I finally found Jane's book.
Jane's book came out in September 2018. I found it was just a really good way of being able to design your own action plan.
But the main thing that Jane is saying is that you've got to take control of your disease. You've got to take your own personal control, which is what I did.
Jane's story is remarkable, but it's also quite unique. If my mum is going to starve her cancer, I want to understand how it could work. The first part of Mum's combination is repurposed drugs. These are drugs that are already widely used for other purposes, like diabetes. 6 months ago, Mum started on a protocol of 4 repurposed drugs from the Care Oncology Clinic in Harley Street, with a prescription costing £20 per month. It's an ongoing trial that allows patients to take repurposed drugs alongside NHS care. Today, she's going for her checkup.
So really pleased with how your blood results have been over the last few months. So I'm actually quite happy to start the statin drug.
Oh wow, that's really what I wanted today. I'm really delighted.
Good.
Yeah.
So
I want to find out exactly how these cheap, widely used drugs could be used to starve cancer.
A very clever clinician noticed that within a group of patients who both had diabetes and cancer, the patients with diabetes and cancer seem to be doing better than the ones with just the cancer. And of course this didn't make any sense until they realized that actually it was the metformin drug that the people with diabetes were taking for their diabetes that was actually helping them not just with the diabetes but with the cancer as well.
Cancer cells love sugar.
People with diabetes need drugs like metformin to reduce the sugar levels in their blood. And it turns out that this could be used against cancer cells. Sugar is cancer's favourite fuel source, but like Piccadilly Circus, you have to block all routes. That's why the Care Oncology Clinic prescribes a combination of 4 drugs designed to work in synergy.
It's looking at the environment that the cancer cell operates in. So if you kind of imagine the soil around the seed, and so the idea that actually if you change the environment or the soil that's favourable to the cancer cell, then that stops the growth of the seed or the cancer cells in this instance.
Intuitively, it makes sense. But is there the clinical evidence that these repurposed drugs can effectively starve cancer? Professor Michael Lisanti at Salford University is pioneering research into combinations of repurposed drugs, like the antibiotic doxycycline. His research shows doxycycline can target the cancer stem cells, which drive the cancer to mutate and become resistant to drugs. And it's that drug resistance that causes 90% of deaths from cancer, so blocking that mutation could be the key to living with a terminal diagnosis.
We saw reductions in cancer stem cells anywhere between approximately 17% up to nearly 70%. And that was in the most common type of breast cancer, which is ER positive, but we also saw effects in HER2 positive patients, between 60 and 90% reductions. Very small study, but very significant in terms of the effect.
The idea behind targeting stem cells is about stopping drug resistance and so prolonging life. The Care Oncology Clinic has only been open since 2015, but they've published results for 95 glioblastoma patients whose life expectancy is just 14 months.
They've all had standard of care treatment, so surgery, radiotherapy and chemotherapy. And then they've had the Care Oncology protocol of the 4 drugs as additional or adjunct treatment. And the data is incredibly encouraging, actually. The 14 to 18 month survival time has, in that 95, gone up to over 27 months.
What's different about the Care Oncology Clinic is that patients are allowed to continue with NHS care. That goes against the norm of cancer research, where patients usually take part in a large randomised clinical trial, with one group receiving a placebo.
But for oncologist Robert Thomas, this makes it unlikely that the evidence from the clinic will be enough to get these drugs into NHS cancer treatment.
I just don't think it's going to produce any scientific evidence which is going to change practice. What changes practice is studies like we do and other people around the world do, where you put people in one strategy and not another, and they're randomised and they're properly statistically evaluated.
But it's not just the Care Oncology Clinic who are conducting research into the use of repurposed drugs for cancer. In fact, a quick look on Cancer Research UK's website shows 2 trials ongoing for metformin and also 2 for aspirin, another drug that comes up a lot in the repurposing cancer space. But these are 2 trials out of a total of 231. Now, why are they so few and far between?
Professor Jack Cusick of Queen Mary University is the winner of Cancer Research UK's Lifetime Achievement Award for his research into the repurposing of aspirin.
Curiously, one of the challenges with something like aspirin is it is so cheap, there is no incentive for drug companies to support these trials. And one of the big challenges is, I think, for large, simple trials that could be in the public good, we really do need to get the government or the health service to take a much more active role in terms of funding these big trials.
We contacted the Department of Health to see if they would be willing to provide more funding for trials into repurposed drugs, but they declined to comment. Without those trials, these drugs will continue to remain outside of the NHS standard of care, and my mum will continue to go to clinics like the Care Oncology here in Harley Street. But that is only part of her cancer-starving strategy.
It's the synergy, it's working together. I don't ever believe it's going to be one thing that cures cancer. I think it's going to be a combination of things working in synergy. I'm going to make a jambalaya today.
Beyond repurposed drugs, diet is a huge part of Mum's effort to starve her cancer.
I would eat anything, as you know, Georgia, wouldn't I, and suddenly overnight I've become this really weirdo eater, and I've got to cook weirdo style now.
By weirdo eater, Mum means she's predominantly plant-based, avoiding dairy and sugar, but it hasn't always been this way.
I had some advice from a doctor, and the advice was that it won't make any difference. And I thought, well, if he's saying it won't make any difference, it's got to be right. So I thought, no, I'll just eat cream cakes. Why not? I'm poorly. Give me the box of chocolates. Why not enjoy myself? How long have I got left? Slug a glass of wine,
When Mum first became ill, I was desperate to find something that might help. And diet was one of the things we tried, buying organic food and eating less meat. But at the time, she just wasn't open to it. It was only when she started to think about her weight that things started to change.
There was a really good doctor there, and he talked about, what he said basically is when a woman comes into my clinic and I look at them and they're overweight, he looks at them and thinks, well, it would really be a good idea if you've got cancer, if you're in a good BMI range. And I thought, I'm not in a really good BMI range. And I thought, actually, I'm going to take control of that. That's something I can do to help myself.
And we know diet alone can reverse type 2 diabetes. So for cancer survivor turned nutritionist Jenny Phillips, the reluctance to focus on food is a real missed opportunity.
So you just can't say food doesn't affect your body, and you only need to look at someone who eats proper, nutritious, healthy food compared to somebody who eats a lot of processed foods and refined foods, because it's also the refined and processed carbohydrates that are an issue. They're very nutrient poor, very high in sugar, because those carbohydrates break down to sugar very quickly. So you've got double whammy.
We know that obesity is the second biggest cause of cancer in the UK after smoking. But is it just about being in a healthy BMI range, or could diet itself be a part of starving the cancer?
So the body's ability to balance angiogenesis, when it's working properly, prevents blood vessels from feeding cancers. And this turns out to be one of our most important defense mechanisms against cancer.
Angiogenesis is a process by which blood vessels form around the cancer cell, and these are the fuel lines that allow the cancer cells to thrive. Now, scientists like Dr. William Lee see cancer as something that can be starved by eating foods that are anti-angiogenic, meaning they'll block the creation of the blood vessels that feed the cancer. And a study of over 75,000 women by Simmons College in Boston saw a 31% reduced risk of breast cancer by consuming just 100 grams of blueberries per week. Other anti-angiogenic foods include turmeric, tomato and garlic. And already within the NHS, diet is seen as having a role for patients who have had early-stage cancer to try and prevent relapse.
There's lots of evidence actually from large cohort studies that people who keep their weight down, avoid inflammatory foods, exercise, reduce their sugar intake and increase the amount of what we call polyphenols, which is the natural chemicals within food which have anti-cancer properties, that they can reduce their odds of relapse quite significantly. In fact, on a par or even better than some of the chemotherapies we give to do the same thing.
So if diet can be as effective as chemotherapy to prevent cancer coming back, why aren't patients with terminal cancer being prescribed diet too? I'm going to Manchester to meet Dr. Michelle Harvey, a dietitian who created the well-known 2-day diet. She's running the Be Ahead trial, which is trying to fill the evidence gap on the potential of diet for patients like my mum.
Patients are very interested in doing dietary things, but there's a lack of really good research that's been done in the clinics. We need to change the hearts and minds, I think, of the research community and oncologists to actually encourage the idea of having good, proper, robust dietary studies that run alongside treatments.
This seems like an important step, but Mum doesn't have time to wait for the evidence. And since making the change, she now has a healthy BMI for the first time in years.
I didn't really appreciate the importance of food, and now I think about everything I put in my mouth, and you know, it's all about finding mechanics with what I'm eating.
One of the things that really comes through with Mum changing her diet is a sense of control, actively choosing to starve her cancer every day through her food. And when you're facing a terminal diagnosis, that's definitely not something to underestimate.
It gave me control back over my life, and I wasn't just having to rely on the doctors. There was things I could do about it, like diet is such an easy one, exercise is such an easy one, supplements, yeah, why not? Well, this is my drugs family. I bet you never knew your mother was a drug addict, did you? Right.
The diet and repurposed drugs are the first two building blocks of Mum's starving cancer regime. Both are growing research areas and cheap to do. But when she started adding supplements into her protocol, I was sceptical.
Supplements can come in many different types, from dietary to vitamin to anti-aging. And in 2018, the market was worth £442 million in the UK. They're quite controversial in the cancer space. And looking here at Macmillan's website, they say that there isn't enough evidence to suggest that taking supplements can help treat cancer. But what evidence is enough?
We know that things are approved on the NHS by large randomised clinical trials, but for Jane, with limited options, smaller studies were enough to convince her that supplements like berberine might be able to help starve her cancer.
There was a huge amount of digging, a huge amount of sifting through a lot of material just to find things that would actually just offer those glimmers of hope. And even the berberine, I didn't know anybody else using it, so I added it in because I couldn't see the merit of leaving it out.
Mum's now incorporated berberine and curcumin into her protocol, and a study released by the Boston University School of Medicine says berberine is able to mimic metformin in regulating blood sugar levels. So even though it's a natural supplement, it seems to have cancer-starving potential. Inspired by both Jane and online research, my mum is building a protocol of supplements to combine with repurposed drugs and diet. But is it worthwhile? I've come to the Institute of Cancer Research to meet Professor Chris Lord, who is wary of patients creating protocols from their own research.
If you're not, I suppose, used to looking at that data, you perceive all of it as being of the same value. And what you cannot do so much is, unless you're professionally trained, I think, is discriminate robust data from less robust data.
And for some, supplements have no place in cancer treatment. Professor Edzard Ernst is the author of Scam, or so-called alternative medicine, and writes on his blog that 99.9% of information about supplements for cancer is unreliable, and much of it is outright dangerous. He also sees anything outside the conventional as bogus. I'm going to find out why.
It makes me a bit nervous speaking to someone that could potentially say that everything my mum's doing is pointless, and it's all that would infer that it's almost like just a matter of time until her conventional treatment stops working. And I don't really want to hear that, so we'll see.
But on the train, I was reminded why I wanted to make this film by the woman sat next to us.
So her dad had cancer and he'd done loads of different things and had a really kind of positive outlook, had done diet and all that stuff, and it made a huge difference for him. So yeah, really a bit of a touching moment, really.
Professor Ernst was without doubt that it was Mum's NHS treatment alone that was making the difference.
The reason why your mum is still alive is because of the science, not of the supplements that she takes. Maybe, and I hope the supplements doing her some good, but it's because of the science that she's alive.
But for that patient in that situation with no options, they've had conventional treatment, they've got an advanced stage of the disease, they're going to want to throw everything they can at it and they don't care about the science. So why shouldn't they be able to do that?
Well, I have full sympathy for desperate patients, but that is a different subject. Desperate patients can fall in the hands of all sorts of quackery, and they do. If you go on the internet, you see virtually millions of websites promising alternative cancer cures to desperate patients. And how do we know that these guys that we are talking about are not just one more group of quacks?
I'm under no illusions that there are alternative cancer cures out there, but nobody is claiming that these supplements alone are capable of starving cancer. And there is growing clinical research into their potential in combination with repurposed drugs. Just this month, Professor Lisanti published a paper on the supplement vitamin C used in combination with 2 repurposed drugs. He's utilising the natural supplement to amplify the starving effects of 2 repurposed antibiotics.
Vitamin C actually amplifies that effect, so we can dial down the concentrations of the antibiotics and simply increase the concentration of vitamin C. So it's a way to starve the cancer cells to death, the cancer stem cells, without using too much antibiotics and using a natural vitamin to amplify their effects.
But even if specific supplements are capable of helping to starve cancer, most patients would struggle to afford the multiple supplements that my mum is taking, costing over £100 per month. A charity called Yes to Life is trying to resolve this.
We work with companies that produce
high quality supplements, or we work with therapists and we try to get the price down as much as we can so that the affordability is there for people.
So Mum, today we're going to Yes to Life's Wellness Day. Today I'm taking Mum along to a wellness day because I know she can often feel overwhelmed trying to starve her cancer by herself.
I think people have just got to take control themselves and look at, and there's lots of alternative things out there, and I think they need to go and explore them to see which ones they believe in and they can do.
Do you think you've got it right?
Of course, yeah.
So, should we starve terminal cancer? I've seen a growing acceptance within the cancer community that it does have potential for treatment.
Initially, the response to this was not always enthusiastic, in the sense that people didn't know a lot about the metabolic approach in the mainstream oncology world. But some of that is changing now.
It's now a kind of very active field of study, so people are now starting to understand how the metabolism of tumour cells is distinct from that in normal cells.
I could envisage maybe metformin in a few years' time being prescribed by oncologists, but we have to wait for the pros and cons from the trials, because there's some data to suggest it could have an anti-cancer benefit. But that's not the same as us prescribing it.
And though attitudes are slowly changing, it still remains outside of the NHS. But Mum wants to starve her cancer now.
Why once look outside the box? And because the internet has changed these days, we can communicate with people. I belong to study groups as well, that I am finding out more and more.
I think I was very lucky that I'd had some medical training and that I was able to read the journals and the papers, and I was able to decipher what might work and what probably was a load of nonsense and snake oil.
But even though it worked for Jane, there is a conflict emerging between patients and the medical professionals over how much control one should have with a stage 4 diagnosis.
A lot of patients just see a website, they don't know the credibility of it, and they come with reams of bits of paper saying, why aren't you giving me metformin, why aren't you giving me intravenous vitamin C?
Anybody, so long as you can work a keyboard, has access to, pretty much all of the data and all the information that's out there. And, it's kind of like, being pushed into a forest, and if you don't know the path through it, it all just looks like trees.
Patients could be at risk of being tempted by alternative cancer cures, but this doesn't feel like that.
And we're publishing in very prestigious, well-respected journals such as Nature Reviews Cancer. We are doing traditional research. The only thing that's really different is that we're focusing on drug repurposing, but again, also that's a big movement worldwide.
I worry that not understanding it properly, I'm not understanding it enough, but it really is, you have to break it down and do one thing at a time.
It is hard on the patient and it does require a lot of self-discipline, but then, what's the option if you're stage 4?
For Mum, starving her cancer is all about making it something she can live a normal life with. And meeting Jane, who has actually done it, is an important part of that.
There's more that can be done, I just know there is.
There is.
Yeah. And Jane, you're going to get an invitation to my 80th birthday party.
If you'd have met my mum a year ago, you would never have believed that this was the same person today. It's too early to say whether it's down to the conventional NHS care or the starving cancer combination, or a bit of both. But for now, the outcome is what matters.
I don't really mind whether it's the diet, the exercise, the repurposed drugs, the drugs that I get from hospital, or the drugs that I get, or supplements. It just really doesn't matter to me. All I'm about is saving my life, really. And I'm quite happy to trial things in combination. I'm doing a complete trial, and a lot of people as well are starting to do this trial type thing. They're just throwing everything at it. And I think that is the way that cancer will be managed in the future.
What Mum said about patients with stage 4 having options really resonated with me. When she was first diagnosed as terminal, we couldn't allow ourselves to hope. But today, I have my mum back, and in many ways, she's living life better than before she had cancer. I'd like to think that one day, everyone diagnosed with stage 4 cancer will be able to live a normal, full life. And I hope that Starving Cancer can be a part of that. But for my mum, I'm certainly not going to stop her trying.
I believe I will be there at your wedding. Oh, you'll get me crying in a minute. And when you have your children, and I've got hope, I have hope.
What are we making, say again?
Most people in my position, you know, it's an inevitable death sentence, death row. I'm off it. I'm out of here.